And you've seen some members of his own party, Marjorie Taylor Greene most prominently, but others as well, sort of saying, look, this is not what we sort of wanted out of a MAGA president, right? What is going on here, President Trump?
Donald Trump returned from South Korea this morning, where he met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping and made a series of announcements on closer trade ties. Trump scored the meeting a 12 out of 10, so he was very happy about it all. But that may be just a truce in the trade wars rather than a forever love affair. Meanwhile, less love is being spread towards Venezuela. Its president, Nicolas Maduro, accused Trump of trying to turn his country into a colony of the US. It follows the US claim to have killed at least 43 people in strikes on alleged drug boats near Venezuela. Other world leaders win or seem to lose affection of the US president, seemingly based on whoever last hosted him for dinner, with fawning compliments and promises of a Peace Prize nomination. Let's talk more about this now with Jamil Jaffer, Executive Director at the National Security Institute at George Mason University in Washington, D.C. Hi, Jamil.
Hey, Neil.
So we've had a lot of more diplomacy and shuttling around the world this week with President Trump. Was his meeting with President Xi, was that a reset moment, would you conclude?
Well, I think the president certainly thinks so. He said a lot of very nice things about President Xi walking out of China and onto the plane. He does appear to have achieved at least something of a truce in the trade wars. He's agreed to reduce by 10% the tariffs on China, in particular, cutting in half the 20% tariffs he imposed as a result of the fentanyl trade coming out of China. He says he's got to deal with President Xi to reduce the amount of fentanyl coming to the United States. So obviously, is a good deal for America, or is important for America because of the tens of thousands of people being killed by fentanyl every year. Beyond that, it looks like the president said that President Xi has agreed to start sending rare earth metals and magnets and the like to the U.S. again. Of course, what China said on the other side, though, is that they are pausing their actions taken in October. They didn't mention the actions taken in April, so it's still a little unclear what exactly all this means. We haven't seen any text of a deal. We've just got the Chinese translation and President Trump's post on Truth Social. So we'll see what it all means in the long run. But at least for now, both leaders seem to be talking nicely about each other and appear to be cooling down, or at least temporarily cooling down, the trade war.
Yeah, what would have happened to make it a 13 out of 10 meeting?
Well, that's a great question. Maybe some sort of a further deal on TikTok. It does appear the president wants to get that done. It does appear the president also, does think he's gotten some concessions on fentanyl, although it's not as much, I think, as he wanted. So we'll see. Maybe a Nobel Peace Prize nomination from the Chinese would have gotten to a 13 or maybe even a 15 out of 10.
That offer of putting him forward for a Peace Prize, that does curry a lot of favour with the president. And it's seeming if you want something for your country, if you want tariffs reduced, if you want military support, tell him he's going to get the prize.
It does appear to have worked for Pakistan and not so much for India. So it does, at least in that dynamic, appear to have made something of a difference.
Here, let's turn our eyes to the other side of the world, to South America, where Donald Trump's got quite keen interest at the moment. He's been going around murdering, some people would say, those who are believed to be drug smugglers on the coast of Venezuela. What's he up to?
Well, look, the president obviously is deeply concerned about the drug trade and the flow of illegal narcotics into the United States. A lot of the problem that the president's been focused on, at least early in his administration, was the flow of fentanyl from China through Mexico. He's now concerned about the flow of various kinds of drugs and illegal immigrants from Venezuela. And now he's raised some concerns about Colombia and cocaine as well, which have been historically there. But we did have a series of successful efforts under Plan Colombia under prior presidents. So we had some success. The president now unhappy, concerned that these drug smugglers are bringing illegals and drugs into the U.S. on these drug boats. So he's ordered the U.S. military as a national security matter, as a threat to the United States. In part, he's claimed invasion. In part, he's claimed that these individuals are narco-terrorists because of the lives they're taking with their drugs. And so he's authorized military action by the U.S. military against these drug boats, a number of strikes in the Atlantic, at least one in the Pacific. And he also disclosed last week that he had authorized CIA covert action, not typically announced by American presidents, in Venezuela. Not clear to what end or what kind of covert action, but clearly a threat against the Maduro regime. We've also seen an aircraft carrier battle group now placed in the Caribbean, and overflights, or at least alleged flights, by B-52s and B-1B bombers, nuclear-capable bombers, off the coast of Venezuela. So a lot of sort of saber rattling going on when it comes to Venezuela and sort of Latin America right now for President Trump.
Is it not constitutionally somewhat questionable to be using military tactics and strikes against individuals for what is a criminal activity?
Well, this is something of a debate, right? If the president believes it's a national security matter and makes that argument, and which he has full-throatedly. He sent a letter to Congress under the War Powers Resolution indicating that he had put American forces into hostilities, had authorized the use of armed strikes under his powers commander-in-chief and chief executive to prevent the flow of drugs in the United States that were killing Americans. So his claim is, look, this is an imminent national security threat to our country. Americans are dying. I'm going to use military action. Numerous presidents over the course of decades, even the course of the entire history of the American Republic, have used that authority and claim that authority without authorization from Congress, without a declaration of war. That being said, when these things are sustained, Congress has sought to reel them in, never successfully. The War Powers Resolution has now been around for the better part of 4 decades. It's never been successful. Congress doesn't seem inclined to enforce it in any way here against drug dealers coming from South America.
Are you comfortable with that?
Well, look, I think that you want Congress to do its job, right? You want Congress to authorize use of military force when the president seeks it.
Congress don't seem to be involved. That's the point. The president seems to be doing things without going to Congress at all, including building an enormous ballroom on the side of the White House.
Well, so he did send the required notice to Congress saying, look, I'm doing this thing.
Yeah.
Here's a letter saying I'm doing it. Congress has the opportunity.
I mean, this is money that they ought to be signing off. What is it, $300 million to build this huge edifice on the side, twice the size of the actual White House, and he's just acting like a personal fiefdom, no?
Well, so 2 different issues. Let's talk about the building of the White House.
Sorry, yeah, we are raging everywhere, but yeah.
Right. So on the White House build, right, the president has taken private donations to do that. That's actually, interestingly, it sounds really sort of shady on his face, right? But it turns out that's actually pretty consistent with historical precedent for renovations of the White House. Whether it's a good idea or bad idea, we can debate that. But historically, the Truman balcony and the like, with the exception, I think, of maybe the Truman balcony, all the other renovations, including the Rose Garden, were done with private donations to this land trust that's around the National Park Service. So that's actually not that unusual. You're right, skipping past the boards that approve these things and the like are a problem. But of course, those boards are all appointed to people that he appoints those boards, so they're likely to sign off at some point anyhow. But to go to your point about the money spent on these strikes, you're right. He's using military dollars and weapons and the like. That is something Congress needs appropriate money for. Of course, the government is shut down. Congress hasn't done its job. Between the president and Congress, they haven't come to a deal on spending. That's its own set of problems, and we see that now playing out here as well.
No, I appreciate it. It sounded like I was sort of leaping all over the place there, from going from Venezuela drug traffickers to a ballroom on the east wing of the White House. But I think the point being that there's a theme between all of these scenarios of in the news this week, and that is the president uniquely seems to act so independently, and it comes with tariffs as well. That Senate today passed a vote saying they don't like what he's done on tariffs, essentially. But of course, that is also something that comes just straight from the pen and the hand of President Trump without any consultation or any sign-off of government. Is that the way Trump seems to like to operate, where he does things which he can do very much independently by presidential decree?
Look, there's no question that that's how President Trump operates. It's how he likes to operate. I think he'd obviously prefer if there simply weren't a Congress. It would be easier for him to operate and run and gun and do the things he wants to do. By the way, not that different than a lot of presidents, right? President Obama and President Biden, both of whom were former U.S. senators, both when they got into office and they faced trouble with their legislative branch, which was controlled by the other party, they sort of pushed back and did a lot of things on their own. Maybe not as much as President Trump, maybe not as aggressively, maybe not moving as fast. But the truth is that this is a common theme with presidents. It is, I think, heightened by the way that President Trump operates, by the way he talks about these things, the kind of actions he takes, whether it's the Doge firings or the tearing down of the East Wing, right? A lot of this is operational, but the truth is, you're right. For a long time, Congress hasn't done its job effectively, hasn't been an effective check on the presidency. And the question is, when is Congress going to stand up and do its part? And at least today, this week, this month, this year, and maybe something will change after the midterm elections, although I kind of doubt it, I don't see Congress prepared to stand up and assert its own power. A system of checks and balances only works insofar as one of the checks or the balance is willing to do its job. Congress, frankly, hasn't been doing that here. And it's not just a Trump thing, although it is most evident here. It's been going on for years.
And there's an absence, I suppose, of a organized and still fractured Democratic Party that doesn't know how to decide which is the best approach to tackle and have a very specific line of attack against Trump.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's one of the problems that we've seen. I think, look, the Republican Party itself isn't standing up for its traditional values in the face of things that President Trump might do because they've determined that their political future is best served by following Donald Trump. And that may be right. Their calculus, that's their calculus. For the Democrats, they haven't figured out how to get a consistent message going that says, here is not just we're opposed to President Trump. We don't like what he does. We don't like the way he operates. We don't like his tone, right? They don't have a positive agenda for America. Here are the 8 things we plan to do. Right. And so I think that's the challenge they're going to face coming into these midterms. You know, normally in midterm elections, which will come in a year from now, you'd see Democrats with a significant majority gaining seats. I'm not sure that's going to happen. We'll see. There's a long time to go before that election, at least a year now, about a year and a few days. The problem, of course, is you got to have an agenda to get the American people. It can't just be we don't like Donald Trump. We don't support his policies. There's got to be a positive agenda. Democrats haven't yet figured that out. Frankly, they haven't figured out whether they want to go more progressive or run to the middle. I have a view on this, but I don't think they're paying any attention to what I think.
Let's return to the global countries of focus that has been around this week that Donald Trump is doing. Is it still a surprise to people how much international affairs are occupying the attention of President Trump? We obviously know that events force that to some extent. With Gaza and his desire to do a deal on the peace deal and hoping that holds together, but has he got a new thirst for international affairs and America's place on the world stage that perhaps even his own supporters wouldn't have imagined he would have done before this second presidency?
Well, I think there is certainly a certain amount of frustration in the Make America Great Again, the MAGA base here in the United States, as they see President Trump taking strikes against Iran, which I think most of the Republican Party and the MAGA base, and frankly, a lot of Democrats supported those strikes, but then see him get involved in military strikes in the Caribbean, threatening Venezuela. Right now, they're seeing the potential for this presidency to turn into a war presidency, not just a trade war with China, not just the economics that President Trump has long talked about, even before he was president, but now real military action. And I do think that makes a lot of members of the MAGA base uncomfortable. They were uncomfortable with it when it was President Bush. They were uncomfortable with it under Obama and Biden. I think they're going to be similarly uncomfortable against it under President Trump. And you've seen some members of his own party, Marjorie Taylor Greene most prominently, but others as well, sort of saying, look, this is not what we sort of wanted out of a MAGA president, right? What is going on here, President Trump? At the same time, you know, between you and me, I think, and all of our listeners, I think the president's doing the right thing. He needs to be able to push back effectively against our adversaries overseas. That includes Iran, that includes North Korea, it includes Venezuela. And by the way, it includes Russia and Ukraine and China when it threatens Taiwan. And we still have to get that thing, you know, sorted out as well, which we haven't quite done yet.
Yeah, I mean, is it possible that he's going to escalate the situation around South America off the coast of Venezuela? There's the US's biggest warship is there. Are the MAGA equally worried about escalation in that region?
I think there's no doubt that they are big believers, and they elected President Trump in part on the agenda of ending all global wars. And I don't think they're really excited about seeing an aircraft carrier in the Caribbean and seeing B-52 and B-1 bombers flying off the coast of Venezuela, even as much as they might not like Nicolas Maduro or the drugs coming to the United States. It's one thing to take counterterrorism drug strikes against a bunch of boats or submarines in the Atlantic or even one in the Pacific. It's a whole different thing to get the U.S. military engaged actively in the Western Hemisphere. Even though there are those of us who think this is the right thing for President Trump to be doing, I think his base is going to be very skeptical of that play.